This video is an introduction to the interactive dials activity built with Web Sketchpad. It's a great introduction to number bases. It doesn't introduce number bases in a fussy way, but rather in a fun, interactive approach that allows the concepts behind number bases to spill out naturally. Let's take a look. Here we have a collection of dials, and each one has 10 tick marks on it. Notice that we have some red dots, one per dial, and we're going to set these in motion by pressing Start Stop. Let's watch what happens. Notice that the dot on the far right dial starts to move from tick mark to tick mark. And oh, look, the dot to the left has moved from the top tick mark to the one to the right. And now, oh, it moved again. So as we have students watch this interactive model, they can start to think about the relationship between the movement of the dots. How many times does this red dot on the far right dial need to move before the dot on this dial moves once? How many times does this dot need to move before this dot here moves once? And so far it hasn't moved at all. And for that matter, how many times does this dot need to move from tick mark to tick mark before any of these other dots move? Now we can speed up the motion here if we'd like by dragging this point. And that will, oh, here we see this dot moved once. So speeding things up does give us a chance to see what the movement of these other dots looks like, but we should also be able to predict it just by looking at this pattern. I can also press Show Numbers. And I'm going to stop for a second here and take a look at these numbers, 1, 8, 6. And these represent where our red dots are on the dial. This dot, for example, here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tick marks away from where it started at the top. And if we watch these numbers as we start the motion again, we realize what we're really looking at here is base 10, with each digit in our number, 220, whatever it is, it's changing as we go, represented by the location of a dot on this dial with tick marks. All right, so you'll notice that we can change the number of tick marks on each dial, and I'm actually going to show you that on page 2 of our sketch by tapping here in the lower right corner to move to page 2. Notice here that we have 3 tick marks on each dial, and again we have these red dots, and if we tap on Start Stop, we see this dot start to move, as is this dot, and we can ask the same question as we did before. How many times does the dot on the far right dial need to move before this dot moves once? Or this dot? Or all these dots here that haven't moved yet? Those are all questions that can get us to start thinking about base 3. Now I'm going to press Start Stop again, and in this position with the dots at these particular locations, what I'd like to know is, based on what you see, how many times did this red dot on the far right dial move around its circle from tick mark to tick mark? How many times did it jump from one space to the next? And it might help to show some numbers like we did on page 1. So here we see the numbers 1, 1, 2, 2, and those again represent the locations of the dots on their dials. And to figure out how many times this dot moved in total is actually equivalent to figuring out how to convert this number in base 3 to base 10. I'll leave that for you to think about. Now I can also reset this to 0, and I can change the number of tick marks on each dial. Here, for example, on my number pad, I'll change the number of tick marks to 5. So now we're looking at base 5. And again, I can watch as the dots move around their dials and think about the relationship between them. And as before, stop anywhere I like and ask, how many times did this dot move from tick mark to tick mark? And to check my work, I can press here and see that that dot moved 16 times. And how can I tell that? By looking here at this number. So there you have it, the interactive dials activity. You can find the interactive model itself by looking below the YouTube video for the link.